My name is Birdie Myers, and I was 38 years old the day I buried my husband in front of 200 people, none of whom were my family. At the exact minute they lowered Tom into the ground, my phone lit up with 34 photos of my sister's birthday party. Gold balloons, a 3-tier cake, my mom raising a glass. The day before, my mother had answered the funeral invitation with a single text. "Today is your sister's birthday. We can't come." My parents chose a dinner reservation over my husband's casket, and my family posted the pictures to prove it. For 6 months after that, none of them called me. Not once. Then one Saturday morning, a headline about me landed on every porch in town, and the same people who couldn't drive 11 minutes to a funeral suddenly called me 11 times in 4 hours. What they found out I had, and what I did about it at a ribbon cutting in front of the whole town, none of them saw coming. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where the people who were supposed to love you become the story you survived. If your family ever measured you by what you could show off instead of who you are, this one is for you. Drop a comment, tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe, because that headline is coming. Tom died on a Thursday in October at 10 minutes past 2 in the afternoon, standing in the paint aisle of the hardware store his hands had kept alive for 20 years. A blood vessel in his brain, the doctors said. There one heartbeat, gone the next, no warning anyone could have caught. He was 44. Walt, his store manager and best friend, called me while I was teaching 8th grade science, and I remember the classroom door and the hallway, and then nothing until the hospital parking lot. Here's what kind of man my husband was. That same morning, he had stuck a note on my lunchbox, the way he did most mornings. Some days a joke, some days a hardware pun so bad I'd groan in the teacher's lounge. I still have that last one. And here's the detail the whole town would repeat later, at the counter, at the diner, at the funeral. The last thing Tom Myers ever rang up, 90 seconds before he fell, was a box of wood screws for a kid building his mother a wheelchair ramp. He charged him half price. He always charged half price for ramps, for school projects, for anybody trying to fix something for somebody else. And he'd wave you off if you thanked him too loudly. Marion Falls, Ohio is not a big town. By Friday morning, there were flowers piled against the store's front door, and a crayon drawing of the store taped to the glass, and Walt standing in the middle of it all with the keys in his hand, not knowing whether opening or closing would break him worse. The town would remember that box of wood screws for a reason none of us could have imagined yet. I called my mother that night, from Tom's side of the bed, because his side still smelled like him, and I needed to be brave for exactly one phone call. I told her my husband was dead. There was a pause, and then my mother, Sharon Wheeler, said the words she'd say at church. "Oh, honey, how awful." And then, in the same breath, asked her first real question. "Will it be a big service? A lot of the store people?" Not "how are you?" Not "do you want me to come over?" She wanted the attendance forecast. I was too hollow to hear it then. Grief makes you deaf to things you've heard your whole life. The funeral was set for the following Tuesday, October 14th. Yes, my sister Kayla's 33rd birthday. I knew the date when I chose it. It was the only day the church and the cemetery could both take us, and I told myself no family on earth would need that explained. I asked my Aunt Patty to remind everyone about the time, and the morning before the funeral, while I was ironing the black dress I'd bought in a fog, my phone buzzed on the ironing board. My mother. One text, no call. "Today is your sister's birthday. We can't come." I read it 3 times. I stood there with the iron in my hand, waiting for the second text, the one that would say "we'll come after," or "Dad will be there," or anything. The iron hissed. No second text came. I thought that message was the cruelest thing my mother would ever send me. I was wrong. The cruelest thing she ever sent had a caption. 200 people came to my husband's funeral. The church ran out of seats, and the ushers propped the doors so the crowd on the steps could hear. 20 years of hardware customers came. Farmers, plumbers, young couples he'd talked out of buying the expensive faucet. My former students came, some of them grown with kids of their own. The entire Little League team came in uniform, because Tom had paid for those uniforms every spring and sworn the league to secrecy, and the coach decided a funeral was the day the secret expired. Walt gave the eulogy with his reading glasses shaking in his hand. Cole Barrett, 19 years old, the kid Tom had promised to train, stood against the back wall and cried the way boys cry when they've lost the only man who ever bet on them. And the front pew, the one with the little reserved for family card and a brass holder, sat empty the whole service. Rosa Delgado, my next-door neighbor, 64 years old, looked at that empty pew for about 10 seconds, then got up from the fifth row, walked forward in her good shoes, and sat down next to me without a word. She held my hand through the whole thing. A woman who'd known me 6 years did what the people who'd known me 38 would not. I got through the hymns. I got through the folding of hands and the line of hugs. Then, at 2 o'clock, while they lowered my husband into the ground and the wind moved the canopy, my phone lit up in my coat pocket. I shouldn't have looked. Everyone will tell you not to look. I looked. 34 photos, posted public, time stamped between 2 and 2:30. The exact half hour my husband went into the ground. Gold balloons spelling out Kayla, a 3-tier cake with sparkler candles. My mother in her teal dress, the one she saves for photographs, raising a champagne flute at the camera. My father mid-laugh with a party hat someone had clearly negotiated onto his head. My brother-in-law Brett in a vest, arm draped over my sister, who was smiling in that careful way she has, like she's checking the smile in a mirror only she can see. The caption, written by my mother, read, "Family is everything." With the champagne emoji, I stood at my husband's grave in my ironed black dress, and I scrolled all 34, twice, while a man I'd never met filled in the earth behind me. I didn't comment. I want that on the record, because everything I did later grew from that one decision. I did not comment. I did not screenshot it for the cousins. I did not go to war in a Facebook thread. I turned the phone off and dropped it into the pocket of my funeral coat, and I listened to the shovel. And here is the detail I couldn't stop doing the math on, because I'm a science teacher, and numbers are how I hold on. The restaurant where those balloons were taped to the wall is 11 minutes by car from the church, where 200 strangers stood for my husband. 11 minutes. They could not drive 11 minutes. Remember that number, because 6 months later, every one of them would drive a great deal farther, a great deal faster, for a very different reason. Let me tell you who they skipped a funeral for. I met Tom 10 years ago, when the radiator in my classroom died in January, and the district said the repair was scheduled for spring. He showed up after closing with a toolbox, fixed it for nothing, and left before I could find him to say thank you. I had to track him down at the store with a plate of brownies, and he looked at them like I'd handed him a trophy. We were married within the year, at the courthouse, because neither of us needed an audience for the truest thing we'd ever done. 9 years. No kids of our own. The kids at the store and the kids in your class are ours, he said once, and meant it. He drove a 12-year-old pickup. He owned 2 flannel shirts he considered formal. Once, a sales rep asked him how a little hardware store survives 20 years of big box competition and the internet, and Tom, restocking washers, said, "Show up. That's the whole secret." He wasn't being modest. It was his entire theology. Show up when the bridge club needs shelving, when the church roof leaks, when a scared kid needs a job. In his desk drawer at the store, there was a folder, cheap, graph paper, dog-eared, labeled Tom's Workshop in pencil. Inside was a dream we'd sketched together over 5 winters, a free trade school for county kids, wiring and carpentry and plumbing, no tuition, taught in the back of the store. There was a column in his handwriting labeled, "Someday." My husband rang up nails for a living and drove a truck older than some of my students. What I knew, and what nobody in my family ever bothered to ask, was what he was doing with the other half of his life. Now let me tell you about the family that skipped it, because you need the machinery to understand the crash. The Wheelers of Marion Falls run on display. My sister Kayla married Brett Voss, a dentist with whitened teeth and a leased German car, and their wedding portrait hangs over my parents' fireplace at the size most people reserve for windows. When I married Tom, my mother left our courthouse lunch early with a headache that cleared up in time for bridge. My wedding photo lives in the guest room, on the dresser, behind a decorative pheasant. I heard the sentence that explains my whole life at Christmas 6 years ago, standing unnoticed in the kitchen doorway while my mother talked to my Aunt Patty at the sink. Patty had said something kind about Tom, how he'd plowed half the block's driveways that morning. And my mother, drying a serving dish, said, "He was just a shopkeeper." Not cruelly. That's the part people miss. She said it the way you'd state a zip code, a plain fact about where somebody ranks. And my role in that family was never daughter, exactly. I was staff. I organized Dad's retirement party. I drove Mom to her knee consults. I wrapped the Christmas presents she gave other people, including, 2 years running, my own. I did it because I'm good at it, and because some dumb loyal animal in me believed that if I carried enough, eventually somebody would look up and see the person carrying. Tom watched all of it and never once fought them. He just sent my mother flowers every birthday, $20-some of quiet decency year after year. She never put his flowers in a vase where guests could see. I counted. Grief is a job you don't get to quit, so I stacked it on top of the one I have. I went back to my classroom after 2 weeks because 13-year-olds are loud enough to drown out almost anything, and some nights I sat in the garage in the cab of Tom's truck because the cab still smelled like sawdust and spearmint, and I wasn't ready for that to fade. Here is the complete record of my family's support in those 6 weeks. Nothing. No casserole, no card. Not one phone call from my mother, my father, or my sister. The single exception came in week 3, a text from my mother that said, "Hope you're holding up." Question: did the store leave you with debts? People are asking. People are asking. My husband was dead 6 weeks, and her concern was whether his little shop had embarrassed the family balance sheet. I typed 4 replies and sent the shortest one. No debts, Mom. It was the truest understatement I have ever written. Every night that winter, I did the same thing. Made tea I forgot to drink, sat at Tom's desk, and opened the graph paper folder. Tom's workshop, the pencil sketches of workbenches, the someday column. I read it the way other people read scripture, and somewhere in those weeks it stopped being his dream I was grieving and started being an instruction I was late for. If you've ever buried your person while your family partied 11 minutes away, I'm sorry, and I see you. Tell me in the comments who actually showed up for you, and subscribe, because the headline is coming, and so is the panic. The first week of December, a cream envelope arrived from the office of Ellen Brooks, attorney at law. Estate of Thomas Myers, please call to schedule. I put on Tom's flannel and made the call. Ellen Brooks has an office above the bank and a voice like a level surface. She spread the papers across her desk in tidy rows, the way I lay out lab equipment, and she walked me through my husband's other life. The store and the building it sits in, owned outright. 3 small rental buildings on the east side, held in an LLC, tenants happy, roofs sound. Index funds, ordinary, boring index funds, fed every single month for 22 years, through 2 recessions, without 1 month missed. Altogether, a little over $2.3 million. Everything to me. The will was simple. His parents were gone. We had no children. And there was nobody on earth with a claim. I want to be honest about what I felt, because it wasn't the movie scene. I didn't gasp. I knew we were comfortable. Tom never hid a thing from me. I'd seen the statements at tax time. What buckled me was seeing it all in one place. The shape of it. 22 years of a man in a 12-year-old truck quietly stacking patience like cordwood, while a town assumed he was scraping by and a family declared him a nobody. It looked less like money than like a portrait of his character, drawn in numbers. Then Ellen slid 1 more page across the desk, and this one wasn't typed. Graph paper. Tom's blunt pencil handwriting, clipped to the front of the folder he'd left in her file, and it said, "If you're reading this, the folder in my desk. Finish it, Bird." My husband left me $2.3 million and 1 instruction. Only one of them scared me. The store had been dark for 2 months while Walt and I figured out what we were. And one iron gray morning in January, I was inside doing inventory when somebody knocked on the glass. Cole Barrett stood on the sidewalk with his hood up and his hands jammed in his pockets. 19 years old, doing the thing boys do when they've rehearsed a speech and are terrified you'll make them use it. I unlocked the door. He didn't come in. He stood on the mat and asked, all in one exhale, whether the apprenticeship Tom had promised him was still, a thing. Because he understood if it wasn't, he just needed to know. No big deal. It was clearly the biggest deal in his world. I knew his file the way teachers know a town. Mother sick, father long gone, works nights stocking shelves at the grocery, good hands, no money for college, and no map to anywhere. Tom had caught him examining a chisel he couldn't afford and instead of watching him like a shoplifter, hired him for Saturdays and started teaching him joinery. He said I had carpenter's eyes, Cole told the doormat, barely audible. Nobody ever said anything like that to me. And standing there in the cold doorway of my dead husband's store, I felt the folder in the desk behind me the way you feel a person in a room, the someday column, breathing. This kid was the first line of it. I told him to come back Saturday and ask for Walt. Then I walked to the front window, and I flipped the sign that had said closed for 2 months over to the side that said back soon. We reopened the store on the first Saturday in February, Walt running the floor and me doing the books after school. And Marion Falls did the thing small towns do when they've decided something matters. Everybody came, and everybody bought one thing. Nobody needed what they bought. Old Mr. Hendricks bought a single hinge. The Ramseys bought a flashlight to add to what I can only assume is a flashlight museum. A young mother bought a paint sample and cried at the register, and Walt gave her a second sample for free, and then he went into the stockroom for a while. By the counter, we kept the condolence book from the funeral, and it filled 3 pages more that first week. Plumbers, teachers, the Little League coach, half of Tom's poker game, women from my church pew, men I'd only ever known as a wave from a truck window. On slow evenings, I read those pages like a census. Somewhere in the 3rd page, it stopped being comfort and became data. I'm a science teacher. I can't help it. 200 people at the funeral. 3 pages of names, and in all of it, not one Wheeler. Not my mother's looping church bulletin cursive, not my father's block capitals, not my sister's autograph-practiced signature. The people who shared my blood were a blank space you could measure. In late February, a woman in a red coat bought wood glue she obviously didn't need and left her card on the counter. Gazette. Features desk. She'd been one of Tom's customers for years. No pressure at all, she said, but when you're ready, the town would love to know what happens to Myers Hardware. I put the card in the folder next to the someday column. Not yet, but soon. I saw my mother exactly once that winter, and it taught me more than the previous decade had. Rosa dragged me back to Sunday service in March. God can handle your anger, and I made a coffee cake. And my mother spotted me across the fellowship hall the way a lighthouse spots a boat. She crossed the room with both hands extended, took my face like a communion cup, and said, at precisely the volume the Women's Committee required, "There's my girl. We're so close, aren't we, sweetheart? So close through all of this." 20 minutes later, in the parking lot, with no audience but the 2 of us and a cart return rack, the channel changed. The warmth drained out of her voice like someone had pulled a plug. Easter was coming, she said. The whole family would be at the house. I should come. And please, Birdie, don't be dramatic about the birthday thing. People talk. I stood there holding my purse. The birthday thing. 4 months of silence. 34 balloon photos over my husband's open grave. And in her ledger, the injury on record was that people might discuss it. That's when I finally understood the operating system I'd been raised inside. For my mother, the sin was never the skipped funeral. The sin was the funeral having witnesses. She didn't need my forgiveness. She needed my cooperation with the official story, in which the Wheelers are a close, handsome family, and everything else is weather. I said I'd think about Easter. I drove home past the store, and the sight of Tom's sign settled something in my sternum. She could have her story. I was about to start telling a different one, in pencil, on graph paper, at first. Here is the part I need you to understand, because everything at the ribbon cutting stands on it. In April, I went back to Ellen Brooks and asked her to build the school, legally, permanently, and in a very particular shape. $1.9 million of Tom's estate would fund an endowment for a free trade school, Tom's workshop, in the store's back building. The interest would pay part-time instructors and materials, forever. And the whole thing would sit inside an irrevocable charitable trust. Irrevocable is the most beautiful ugly word in the law. It means no one can ever undo it, rename it, redirect it, or borrow against it. Not a judge in an ordinary mood, not a scheming relative, not a future version of me. Ellen took off her glasses and did her duty. Did I understand I could never get the money back? That no circumstance, illness, remorse, family pressure would unlock it? She is required to ask 3 times, in 3 ways. 3 times I said yes. Because here is the truth I'd figured out alone in the cab of Tom's truck. I wasn't locking that money away from my family. I was locking it away from my own worst hope. I knew myself. I knew that 38 years of wanting a seat at that table doesn't die from one funeral, and that some soft evening years from now, my mother could cry in my kitchen, and I could find myself trying to buy back a family with my husband's life savings. So I welded the door shut while my hands were steady. Kindness to my future self, Ellen called it. 2 days later, I signed. 4 days after that, I called the number on the red coat reporter's card. The reporter came to the store on a Tuesday after close. We sat on paint buckets, which she said was the best interview furniture she'd had all year, and I told her about Tom, the radiator he fixed for a stranger, the Little League uniforms and the sworn secrecy, the half-priced wood screws, the graph paper folder with the someday column, which she held for a moment the way you'd hold someone's newborn. I told her about coal, and the wiring class, and the back building. I did not say one word about my family, and she noticed the shape of the hole, because good reporters do, and she was kind enough not to put her finger in it. The story ran that Saturday. Front page, above the fold, with a photograph of me standing in the store doorway holding the folder. The headline read, "Widow turns Myers Hardware into free trade school. $1.9 million gift honors the man who always showed up. $1.9 million. In print. On every porch in Marion Falls and every screen in 3 counties by breakfast, next to a pull quote from Walt that made me cry in the cereal aisle when I finally read it. The paper hit porches at 6 in the morning. I know the timeline the way I know a lab procedure because I wrote it down that night, feeling like a researcher watching a reaction finally run. My phone rang for the first time at 9:41 a.m. My mother. I let it go. It rang again at 9:52, 10:15, 10:40. By 1 o'clock I had 11 missed calls. My mother, my father, my sister, my brother-in-law, 2 cousins who hadn't dialed my number in years. 6 months of grief. 0 calls. 1 headline about money. 11. Every last one of them from people who couldn't drive 11 minutes to a funeral. I didn't answer that day. I sat at the kitchen table with the paper and a pot of tea and let the voicemails accumulate, and I listened to them all that evening in order, like tree rings. Voicemail 1, 9:41 a.m., my mother, festival-voiced. "Birdie, honey, we just saw the paper. We are so proud, this is just wonderful. Call your mother." Honey. Wonderful. A stranger would have heard love. Voicemail 4, early afternoon, the temperature dropping. "Birdie, it's your mother again. I don't understand why you're not picking up. This involves the family, sweetheart. We have things to discuss." There it was. Involves the family. 6 months too late, and aimed at a bank balance. Voicemail 7, evening, the mask fully off. "Your father is very hurt that you didn't tell us about any of this. After everything, Birdie. Call me tonight." After everything. I laughed alone in my kitchen, one short bark that would have scared the cat if we'd had one. In her story, the silence had been mine. My brother-in-law Brett texted, Saw the news, incredible. Let's grab dinner soon, have a business idea you're going to love. Two cousins surfaced like bass after rain. And my sister texted just one line, late, at 11:40 p.m., which I turned over for an hour and couldn't read the temperature of. The paper made me cry. Can I call you sometime? Here's the arithmetic I did before bed, the same kind I'd done at the graveside, because numbers are how I hold on. My husband died and my family managed 0 phone calls in 6 months. A newspaper said $1.9 million, and they managed 11 in 4 hours. My mother finally came looking for me the day I became worth being seen with. Sunday afternoon, a sedan I'd known since high school pulled into my driveway. My parents had finally found 11 minutes. They came up the walk with supermarket flowers, carnations, the receipt still stapled to the cellophane. And my mother hugged me on my own porch for the first time since the wedding she left early. She held on an extra beat, angled toward the street. Even with no cameras, my mother performs for the one in her head. Inside, she did a thing I will never forget. She appraised my house. Her eyes went around the living room like a realtor's. The built-ins Tom made, the refinished floors, the good light. And she said wonderingly, "This place has real bones. I never noticed." 11 years she'd had the address. My father stood in the doorway to the garage looking at Tom's tool wall, the way men look at cathedrals, and said it was a heck of a setup, which in Gary Wheeler is a eulogy. We drank coffee. And then my mother folded her hands and began the rewrite. "We always said it," she told the carnations. "Tom was the steadiest man in this town. We always said that." The sentence hung there, freshly painted. I set my cup down, and I used my classroom voice, the one for correcting a wrong answer without humiliating the student. "No, Mom. You said he was just a shopkeeper. Christmas, 6 years ago, at the sink. I was standing in the kitchen doorway." One beat of silence. My mother smiled the way you'd drive over a pothole without slowing. "Well," she said, "we'd love to have you for dinner Sunday. The whole family. To celebrate you." "To celebrate you?" I said yes, and I watched surprise flicker over her face before triumph covered it. Not because I believed her, because a scientist doesn't get to skip the experiment. Sunday dinner at my parents' house had the production values of a network holiday special. The lace tablecloth that comes out for pastors, the wedding china, a roast that must have cost what my mother usually calls highway robbery. My sister Kayla hugged me at the door and held on a half-second too long, like she was trying to send a message through her arms that she couldn't say in the house, then stepped back into formation. Brett poured wine like a man being graded on volume. My father carved. My mother orchestrated, radiant, narrating dishes, steering conversation like traffic. And I sat where I have always sat, one chair off center, watching the machine run with my new eyes. It was fascinating, honestly. Once you stop needing a performance to be true, you can finally admire the choreography. My mother raised her glass and said, "To family," and looked right at me with what an anthropologist might call warmth. And everyone drank, and I watched my sister's eyes go to her plate on the word family, like the word had a weight only she could feel. They asked about the school with the studied casualness of people who had rehearsed not seeming eager. How big would it be? Who decides these things? Is there, this from Brett, swirling his wine, a board? Or is it all just you? All just me, I said pleasantly, and watched that answer travel around the table like a current. My mother's smile tightened one notch. Dessert arrived, my mother's famous lemon cake, the one she makes when something is being celebrated or extracted. And with dessert came the reason for the tablecloth. Brett straightened, set down his fork, and produced the voice he must use on patients before the drill comes out. He'd been thinking, he said, about synergy. His dental practice, "You know it's the premier practice in Westbrook," was at an inflection point. Growth opportunities everywhere. All it needed was a bridge. He actually used the word bridge to a science teacher, apparently unaware bridges are load tested. $150,000. He said it fast, like a man ripping tape. Structured as an investment, really, an opportunity he wanted me to have. My mother leaned in on cue, folding her napkin and laid the velvet over it. Family invests in family, Birdie. There it was. 6 months of silence, one headline, one roast, and now the family motto, freshly minted for the occasion. Around that table, nobody breathed. Kayla was studying her plate like it held an exam. My father was nodding along in the vague way he nods at weather reports. And I felt strangely calm, because the experiment was running clean and the data was beautiful. I asked my one question. I kept my voice level, the way I do when a student is about to see their own error. When Tom died, the store needed hands for a week. Walt is 61 and he was there alone at 6 a.m. Not one person at this table offered an hour. What changed? The silence had texture. Brett recovered first. Well, we're not really hardware people. And heard it land, and stopped. 6 months of silence, one headline, and suddenly, it's family invests in family. If you can smell what's coming, subscribe. Because what they asked for next at my husband's school is the part I still can't believe. Then my mother patted my hand twice, like sealing an envelope, and said there was one more small thing they wanted to discuss. About the name on the school. My mother presented it the way you'd present a gift you expect to be thanked for. The school, she said, was a beautiful idea. Beautiful. But had I really thought about the name? Tom's workshop is sweet, honey, but sweet isn't legacy. We were thinking, the Wheeler Family Foundation. She let it shimmer over the lemon cake. There was more, and it arrived rehearsed. The ribbon cutting was going to be the event of the summer, wasn't it? The Gazette would be there, maybe Columbus Stations, and the family should be part of it, properly. Front row, all of them. She would say a few words. A mother's perspective. And the name on the gate, or at least on the endowment, where names matter. Wheeler. There's no Myers family left, sweetheart, she said gently, like she was breaking sad news rather than erasing a man. You're a Wheeler. You'll always be a Wheeler. Let the family stand behind you on this. I looked at her for a long moment, and I gave her the plain technical truth, in the voice I use for explaining why the volcano project can't use real lava. The endowment was signed, sealed, and irrevocable. Permanent. The name was part of the trust instrument itself. It could not be changed. Not by me, not by anyone, not ever. My mother received this the way she receives all inconvenient facts, as an opening position. Everything can be renegotiated, honey, she said, patting my hand again. Your father knows people. And that's when I finally saw it whole, glinting under the chandelier she'd bought to impress a congressman's wife who never came. They didn't need the school's money. They needed its name. They had come to collect the one thing Tom had never owed them: credit. I declined dessert seconds, went home, and by Wednesday, the town's weather changed, because my mother had been seeding clouds. A woman from the church auxiliary stopped me at the pharmacy, hand on my arm, eyes wet with borrowed feeling. Your mother is just heartbroken, Birdie, after all she's done for you girls. An aunt on my father's side called to say, in the tone of a diplomat, that the school could be the thing that heals this family, as though the school were a casserole and not my husband's grave marker with a roof on it. The Gazette's editor mentioned to Walt, apologetically, that someone had pitched them a follow-up story angle. The Wheeler family's school project. He'd declined. Someone. I recognized every gear in the machine because I'd spent 38 years being one of them. This is how my mother wins. She never argues the facts with you. She simply tells her version to enough people at the right altitude and lets the town do the pressing. She doesn't need you to agree. She needs you to get tired. And I'll confess, the old exhaustion started up in me on schedule. That lifelong reflex that says, just give them something. Smooth it over. You're good at that. Then, Thursday night, grading a stack of quizzes at the kitchen table, I got a text that didn't fit the pattern. My sister. Can I come by tomorrow? Just me. Don't tell Mom. I sat looking at it with a red pen in my hand. In 33 years, I could not remember one time Kayla had wanted to be somewhere our mother didn't know about. I texted back, "Come." My sister sat at my kitchen table turning a mug of tea she never drank, and for a while she talked about nothing: the kids, the weather, the way you circle a cold pool. Then she stopped circling. "I asked her to move the party," Kayla said to the mug. "When Patty told us the funeral was on my birthday, I said, 'Mom, we have to move the dinner, it's Tom's funeral.' I begged her, actually. I didn't move. 10 years of teaching has taught me when to be furniture." She said no. "And you want to know the reason? The actual reason?" Kayla laughed, a sound with broken glass in it. "The deposit. The restaurant deposit was non-refundable. $200, Birdie. That's what his funeral was worth to her. That's the exchange rate. $200. I stood, ran the tap, and set a glass of water in front of my sister, mostly so my hands had a job. Then I asked the question I'd been carrying since the graveside. "Did you post those pictures?" She flinched like I'd flicked her. "Mom took my phone. She'd been posting all afternoon." She said. Kayla closed her eyes, quoting from memory. "Grief doesn't need an audience, but a birthday does." We sat with that sentence between us like something that had crawled out of the wall, and I want to be fair here, because fairness is all I have left. My sister cried at my kitchen table, and I believed every tear. She'd begged, been overruled, sat in the gold balloons like a prop, and hated it. It was true, and it was terrible, and here is what else was true. She had still sat there. I believed her. And it didn't change a single thing I had to do. My father came to the store on a Saturday, alone, in the manner of a man running an errand he hadn't been assigned. Gary Wheeler spent 20 minutes among the fasteners, picking up a level and putting it down, reading the back of a caulk tube like it had a plot, while Cole restocked around him, and Walt watched from the register with a poker face I appreciated. Finally, he came to the counter with a hammer. My father has 3 hammers I know of. Nobody needs a 4th hammer. He turned it over in his hands and said, to the hammer, "Your mother just wants us all together again. She means well, Birdie. Underneath." Underneath. My whole childhood lives in that word. Everything decent about my father filed underneath, where it never has to show up and testify. I rang up the hammer, and I asked him the only question I had left for him. Quiet. No edge on it. Because you don't need an edge when the question is heavy enough. "Dad, where were you at 2 o'clock on October 14th? He looked at the hammer. Off in the aisles, a drill test whined and stopped. "There was cake," my father said. And then he heard it. I watched the sentence arrive in his own ears, watched a 66-year-old man hear the actual size of it. And his face did something I hadn't seen since his own father's funeral, and he couldn't say anything else at all. He paid with a 20 and left his change on the counter. $11. Everything that man ever handed me my whole life came out even and on time, except the one thing that counted. I took what was left of my questions to my Aunt Patty, my mother's younger sister, who lives one town over with a porch swing and no filter. She poured iced tea and let me get the whole thing out, the text, the balloons, the rename. And then she rocked for a while, deciding something. "You know about the lawn," she said finally. It wasn't a question. I knew pieces. She gave me the whole of it. My mother was 12 when their father's business failed. Properly failed, with men in short-sleeved shirts carrying furniture out of the house and stacking it on the front lawn for the whole street to inspect. Neighbors came out to watch. Her best friend watched from across the road and didn't wave, and on Monday at school there was a new empty ring around her at lunch, where she stood holding the meal voucher the county gave you in a line where everyone could see what color it was. 2 years of that, Patty said. Sharon didn't grow up wanting to be rich, child. She grew up wanting to never be looked at like that again. Every picture she posts is a shield. Kayla's the prettiest shield she ever made. She looked at me over her glass. And you married a man who didn't care who was looking. You have no idea how frightening that is to her. I drove home the long way, past the store, and sat in the truck in my driveway for a while. I understand my mother now, as well as I ever will. A 12-year-old guarding a furniture pile, 60 years on. Understanding why she built the shield doesn't mean I owe it my husband's name. My mother came alone on a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks before the ribbon cutting, with no flowers and no audience, and that alone told me to pay attention. Sharon Wheeler, without a witness, is Sharon Wheeler at her most true. She sat in Tom's chair, which I chose not to fight about, and she made her final offer with her hands folded, like a woman at a parole board. I'm asking you as your mother, not for money. I have never once asked you for money. True, technically, she'd asked through Brett. Front row for the family, a few words from me at the podium, and the family name somewhere on that gate. A plaque, even. Something small and tasteful. Give me that, Birdie, and it's over. All of it. You have your family back. Sunday dinners, Christmas morning, somebody's table to sit at when you're old. Everything like before. But better, because now we'd be so proud of you. I want to be honest with you about that moment because this channel is where I tell the truth. It worked on me. Not the plaque. The picture. 38 years I had waited for my mother to be proud of me out loud, and here she was, offering it at retail, and some starving thing in me stood up at the smell of it. She saw it too. She's not stupid. She's precise. She reached over and squeezed my hand. You'll never eat a holiday alone again, sweetheart. For one long night after she left, I wanted to say yes. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Then, sometime after midnight, I opened Tom's folder one more time. Everything I needed was in that folder, the way everything you need usually is, filed where you left it. Tom's pencil sketches, the workbench heights annotated in his blunt hand, the someday column. And in the corner of the last page, a joke he'd written to himself. Small, like he was embarrassed of it. Rule 1 of the school, show up. On top of the folder sat the first enrollment form, already filled out in careful ballpoint, Cole Barrett, age 19, program carpentry, and a photo Walt had texted me that afternoon. The entry gate he'd built from store oak. Sanded, oiled, blank, waiting for the carving. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote the ribbon-cutting speech twice. The first draft had my family in it. 3 tight paragraphs. The text message, the balloons, the 6 months of silence. Accurate as a lab report. And I read it out loud to the empty kitchen and it felt like power. And then I read it again and heard what it actually was. If I put them in my speech, they would be in the school's story forever. The Gazette would print it, the town would retell it, and every kid who ever walked through Tom's Gate would walk through my grievance to get there. Tom's Gate doesn't owe them a doorway, not even as villains. I tore the draft in half and wrote the second speech, the true one, and it wasn't about the Wheelers at all. Then I made 2 phone calls about seating, and I slept better than I had in 8 months. Saturday came up bright and windless, 200 folding chairs on the lot where his truck used to park, and at 9:15, my mother's sedan pulled in, carrying 4 people and 1 final condition. The lot looked like the town had decided to throw itself a wedding. 200 folding chairs in rows where Tom's truck used to park. A red ribbon across Walt's oak gate, which stood covered in a drop cloth like a monument waiting for a president. The high school band tuning in the corner, more enthusiasm than pitch. Rosa's table of pan dolce and coffee, 3 deep in customers. The Little League team in their uniforms, on their coach's orders, because Tom bought these and he's going to see them worn. The Gazette photographer, and next to her, a TV camera from Columbus. Into all of this, at 9:15, came the Wheelers, dressed like an insurance commercial. My mother in the teal dress, the photograph dress. She moved through the crowd accepting condolences she had never earned and made for the front row, where she stopped. Because the front row had name cards, hand-lettered by my 8th graders, Cole Barrett, first student, Rosa Delgado, Walt Jensen, Mrs. Henriksen, who bought a hinge, the coach, the reporter in the red coat, and 1 empty chair on the aisle with a card that said, Tom Myers, founder. The Wheeler seats were in row 4, with everybody else's. I watched my mother read those name cards twice, watched her recalculate, And then she found me at the side of the stage, smiling for the visible public, speaking through the smile for me alone. Fix the seating, sweetheart, before people notice. And then, softer, the real instruction. And you'll mention the family in your remarks, yes? Columbus is here. People are watching. People are watching. Her whole cosmology in 3 words. I looked at my mother, camera ready, front row hungry, 60 years away from a furniture pile on a lawn, and I asked her the only question I had left. What was the deposit, Mom? She blinked. Behind us, the band stopped tuning, and the morning got very bright and very quiet in that way outdoor mornings do. What? She said. The restaurant deposit, October 14th. I kept my voice the way I keep it when a student is about to see their own error on the board. Level, patient, no place to hide in it. My mother's face didn't move, but her eyes did. One flick toward the crowd, checking her perimeter. Always checking. I don't know what you... $200, I said. Kayla asked you to move the party. You said no, because of a $200 deposit. So that's the number, Mom. That's the going rate. I stand next to that number every time you say the word family. For 3 full seconds, my mother had no line. I had never seen it before, and I noticed, with the strange clinical corner of my brain that never shuts off, that she looked smaller without a script, and older, and for a heartbeat, almost young. Then the machine caught, and she changed strategies with the smoothness of 40 years' practice, voice down into velvet, hand on my wrist. Don't do this today, Birdie. Today can fix everything. Give the speech right, and all of it goes away. You get your family back. Give the speech right. Even now, standing in the middle of 200 people who had come for a dead man who never once checked who was watching, she was negotiating the camera angle. Over her shoulder, I could see Kayla, 3 steps back, close enough to have heard all of it, holding her purse strap with both hands. Brett was checking his tie in the reflection of the store window. The band teacher caught my eye and tapped his watch. Apologetic. Microphone in 90 seconds. 38 years on one side of the scale. A man's name on the other. I stepped up to the microphone with Tom's folder under my arm, and I did not clear my throat, because I had already decided nothing about this was going to sound like an apology. I told them about a man who fixed a stranger's classroom radiator in January and ran from the thank you. I told them about the uniforms they were sitting in front of, and the sworn secrecy, and how the coach broke the statute of limitations at a funeral. I told them the last thing Tom Myers ever sold was a box of wood screws, half price, for a wheelchair ramp, and that I could hear him objecting to me telling it. Then I turned to the front row, and I gave the honor where the honor had always belonged. Cole Barrett, who knocked on a closed door and became this school's first student. Rosa Delgado, who sat with me the first night and every night after. Walt Jensen, who opened this store alone at 6 a.m. the morning after his best friend died. Mrs. Henriksen, who bought a hinge she didn't need so a widow would keep the lights on. This school wasn't built by money. It was built by people who showed up. I nodded to Walt. He pulled the drop cloth, and there it was. His oak gate, and carved across the header, traced from a pencil line in a graph paper folder, my husband's own handwriting. Show up. That's the whole secret. 200 people came off their chairs, and under the applause, I leaned back to the microphone for the last piece, the one sentence I had rewritten 9 times. The Myers Endowment is permanent. Permanent means it can never be renamed, redirected, or renegotiated by anyone, including me. Some things should stay exactly what the man who built them meant them to be. I never said the word Wheeler. I never looked at row 4. The absence was the answer, and everyone it was addressed to received it. At the edge of my vision, Teal rose from a folding chair. My mother left through the middle of a standing ovation, and she made even that a production. Chin high, purse squared, my father and Brett pulled behind her like luggage, her exit choreographed to read as dignity to anyone watching from a distance. Kayla stood a moment longer. She looked at the gate, and at me, and I watched my sister choose in real time, watched the cage door swing on its hinge. And then she went. Because 33 years of training doesn't break at one ribbon cutting. But she looked back. Once, at the gate. I hold on to that. At the edge of the parking lot, past the last row of chairs, my mother turned around, and for the first time in my life I heard her voice crack loose from its volume control, loud enough that strangers turned. Do you know what it's like to be looked down on your whole life? And there she was. Finally. Not the church committee empress, but a 12-year-old on a lawn full of repossessed furniture, 60 years of shield building come down to one question screamed across a parking lot. I didn't use the microphone. I said it just loud enough to reach her, because it only needed to reach her. Yes, Mom. I learned it at your table. She stood absolutely still for a moment. Then she got in the sedan, and the doors closed, and the applause behind me washed over the sound of the engine. I turned back to 200 people and my husband's handwriting carved in oak. Here is what I want you to know about the cost, because winning stories lie about the cost. I knew what I hadn't done. I hadn't thrown Brett the rope, and his practice was going down, and it would pull my sister's life down with it. And I could have stopped it. Choosing yourself has a body count of dreams. Nobody tells you that part. The bill came due the way it always does with my mother. In narrative. Within a week, her version was circulating through the church auxiliary like a flu. Poor Sharon, publicly humiliated by her own daughter at an event in front of cameras, after everything that family has been through. A woman I've known since Sunday school looked through me at the grocery store. 2 casseroles worth of ladies chose sides, and their side had better hair. And I corrected no one. Not one phone call, not one reply all, not one carefully worded post. The old me would have bled out trying to be believed. The fixer, the explainer, the girl who carried things so somebody would notice the carrying. But I'd run the numbers. My mother got the town's ears and I got its hands. 42 people signed up as school volunteers at the ribbon cutting. The sign-up sheet ran out of lines and Walt stapled on a second page. Let her keep the story. I kept the carpenters. Brett left one voicemail that week. No pitch in it, no synergy. Just a tired man saying the practice was being sold, that they'd be simplifying, and, at the end, flat as a receipt. You probably did the math right, Birdie. First honest sentence he ever gave me, and it cost him everything to dial it. I didn't call back. There was nothing in my hands he was owed. The saws started up in the workshop the first week of September. Cole and 6 other kids, Walt bellowing measurements over the noise, sawdust drifting into the coffee. Summer ended. The school lived. And one Friday evening in June, a year after the ribbon cutting, somebody knocked on the workshop door after closing. By then, Tom's workshop had graduated its first class. 14 kids in work boots on folding chairs, getting certificates Walt had cut from oak veneer because paper wasn't serious. Cole finished top of the class, apprentice papers with a union electrician in Westbrook. The first Barrett ever, his mother in the front row in her church dress, crying into a pan dulce rosa pressed on her. The Gazette front page hangs framed in the entryway now, and beside it, smaller, a note in blunt pencil about a lunchbox, which visitors assume is something official. The knock that Friday was my sister. Alone, in jeans, no camera-ready anything. The practice was gone, she said. Sold, debts settled, Brett managing for the man who bought it. They'd moved to a small house on Maple with a kitchen you could touch both walls of. And weirdly, she said, looking at her hands, I can breathe there. She didn't ask for money. I'd braced for it, and I was wrong, and I was glad to be wrong. What she asked, standing in her dead brother-in-law's school under his handwriting, was, how did you learn to stop performing? I don't know how to stop. I gave her the only true answer I have. Somebody watched me with no camera in the room. Start there. She helps Rosa with the Friday bake table now, some weeks. We are not healed. We are something more useful, honest. My mother tells the town the school was a family vision she'd always encouraged. The machine still runs. It just lost my address. My father comes to the store once a month, buys one small thing he doesn't need, and pays with exact change. Last month, at the counter, he managed a whole sentence. Your husband would be proud of you. Late by a lifetime, and I took them anyway. Most evenings I lock up last. I check the breaker, straighten the chairs, and on the way out I put my hand flat on the carved header of Walt's gate, on the downstroke of the Y in my husband's handwriting, the way some people touch a doorpost. The lot is quiet at that hour. The chalk lines of the parking spaces glow a little in the dusk, and if I stand in the right spot, I'm standing where his truck used to be. I think about the text sometimes. Today is your sister's birthday. We can't come. Because you don't get to unmemorize things, you only get to file them where they belong. Here's where I filed it. My mother taught me that family can't come. 200 strangers taught me that family is whoever does. The seat I begged for at their table my whole life turned out to be a folding chair, and the table I built instead seats the entire town. Tom was right all along, and it's the only inheritance that matters, the one carved over the gate where the money can never touch it. Show up. That's the whole secret. Love was never the name cut into the wood. It's the boots that keep walking through it. The text that said, "We can't come." 34 balloon photos over an open grave. 11 missed calls after one headline. And a wooden gate carved in a dead man's handwriting. If your family ever measured you by what you could show them instead of who you are, tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one. And subscribe to Hidden Family Revenge, because next week's story cuts even deeper.